Imagine a devastated patriarch, basically an aging CEO of this massive family enterprise, holding the bloody, shredded jacket of his absolute favorite son.
Right, just the ultimate tragedy.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
A random, horrific animal attack that claims the life of his golden child. But what if I told you this wasn't an accident at all?
Oh, it completely changes the entire picture.
It really does. What if you found out this was actually a highly calculated, ruthless corporate takeover orchestrated by his own older children? You look at a curated family tree of historical heroes and you expect absolute harmony. But if you actually walk into the room with these people, the reality is a chilling web of deception, jealousy, and, well, cutthroat survival.
I mean, it's the ultimate illusion of history, right? We love the final, polished product, the legacy that gets written in the history books. But we are often terrified to look at the incredibly messy, frankly, brutal reality it actually took to forge that legacy.
Exactly. And that is exactly what we're examining today for you. We are taking a deep dive into an incredibly thorough, academically rigorous document that breaks down Genesis chapters 35 to 37. Okay, let's unpack this because our mission today is to completely strip away the sanitized, Sunday school felt board versions of these stories that so many people grew up with.
You really need to leave those behind.
We do. We are diving headfirst into the historical, the sociological, and the deeply psychological realities of one of the most famous ancient families in human history, the family of Jacob.
And this specific three-chapter section of the text is absolutely crucial because it acts as a massive narrative transition zone.
Right.
We are moving out of the crisis-heavy, chaotic life of the patriarch Jacob, and we are setting the stage for the rise of his son Joseph. It is an incredible pivot from immense family instability into this emerging world-altering destiny.
Yeah, a huge shift.
But we have to understand something right out of the gate, that destiny isn't born out of peace. It is forged through intense, generational, and sometimes violent internal conflict.
Right. To understand where this family is going and how they eventually end up shaping history, we first have to look at the incredibly messy reality of where they currently are. So our source material kicks things off in Genesis 35.
The return to Bethel.
Yes, exactly. The theme here is spiritual reorientation. God is calling Jacob back to a place called Bethel. But before they can go, Jacob issues a command to his household that honestly totally threw me off. He tells them to get rid of their foreign gods.
Yeah, that catches a lot of modern readers off guard.
I mean, I have to push back on the traditional narrative here. The popular myth is that Jacob had his big dramatic wrestling match with God, got his name changed to Israel, and from that moment forward, he was this perfectly faithful, deeply monotheistic patriarch.
Right, the perfect hero.
But here we are years later, and his household is apparently still packed to the rafters with foreign idols. It's like a modern politician who is about to announce a run for public office, frantically trying to scrub their messy, embarrassing online footprint before the press finds it. Like, quick, delete all those old posts before we show up at Bethel.
That is a great functional analogy, actually. What's fascinating here is that household syncretism, which is the blending of different religious beliefs and practices together, was completely normal, even expected in the ancient Near East.
Really? Even for them?
Oh, absolutely. Early Israelite religion wasn't centralized yet. It was still in its absolute infancy.
But wait, didn't they see that as cheating on their primary god? Like, how do you justify having a pocket full of foreign idols while claiming to follow the God of Abraham?
Because you have to look at it through an ancient functional lens
Yeah.
rather than a modern theological one. People kept these household gods, these teraphim, as a sort of spiritual diversified portfolio.
A spiritual diversified portfolio. Wait, really?
Yeah.
That is wild.
I mean, think about it. Life in the ancient world was incredibly precarious. A single drought, a plague, or a raid could wipe out your entire family.
Right. You're always living on the edge.
Exactly.
Okay.
So while you might pledge your ultimate allegiance to the God of your fathers for your overarching destiny, you might also keep a little fertility idol on the shelf just to make absolutely sure the crops grow next spring.
Ah, okay.
You are hedging your bets to ensure survival. It was a spiritual insurance policy.
Wow. But returning to Bethel meant giving all that up.
Yes. Bethel was a deeply sacred site, and going there meant choosing a singular allegiance. You didn't just casually stroll up to a divine encounter in the ancient world. Ritual purification was an absolute requirement. You had to physically and spiritually strip away the competing loyalties.
And notice what happens when Jacob finally does this. God reaffirms the name Israel for him.
Right. He doesn't introduce the name for the first time here. He's reminding him.
Precisely. It's a reinforcement of his core identity. It's as if the text is saying, now that you have finally buried the backup plans and the diversified portfolio, you can actually step into who you are supposed to be.
But if you were listening to this expecting Jacob's life to suddenly become easy and blessed after this spiritual high, the narrative immediately pulls the rug out from under you.
Oh, it really does. The story crashes abruptly from these spiritual heights into...
Yeah. Rachel is Jacob's deeply beloved wife, the one he worked over a decade to marry. And she dies tragically while giving birth to his final son, the final son of the covenant line.
And the psychological weight of this moment is just staggering. As she is actively dying, taking her final breaths, she names the baby Benoni, which translates to son of my sorrow.
Such a heavy burden for a child.
I mean, can you imagine carrying that name for the rest of your life? Every time your father calls you for dinner, he's reminded that you killed the love of his life. But Jacob immediately intervenes and changes the boy's name to Benjamin, meaning son of the right hand.
That intervention by Jacob is so crucial. If we look at this through a psychological lens, Jacob is trying to rewrite the narrative of trauma.
Right. He's stepping in.
Yeah, he refuses to let his final son be defined by death and sorrow, shifting his identity to one of strength and favored status. But it highlights a profound theological and literary insight from the source text. Loss inextricably accompanies covenant continuity. The family grows, the historical promise moves forward, but it comes at an agonizing cost.
And the hits just keep coming for Jacob. The trauma compounds.
Yeah.
Because right after he buries the absolute love of his life, his oldest son, Reuben, sleeps with Bilhah, who is Jacob's concubine.
Yeah, the timing is brutal.
Now, if you are reading this through a modern lens, it just sounds like a random act of gross immorality. It feels like a trashy, sweeps week soap opera plotline designed for shock value.
Which is exactly why we have to apply a sociological lens to understand the actual mechanics of what is happening.
Yeah.
This was not a random crime of passion or lust.
Yeah.
No, this was a highly calculated, ruthless boardroom coup.
Huh.
In the ancient Near East, laying claim to the patriarch's concubine was a direct, aggressive challenge to the patriarch's authority.
So wait, you're telling me this wasn't about the concubine at all? This was Reuben trying to steal the keys to the kingdom?
Exactly. Jacob's strength is waning.
Yeah.
He is utterly distracted by profound grief. He is vulnerable. And Reuben, as the firstborn, is looking at the power vacuum and essentially trying to usurp the throne of the family prematurely.
Wow.
By taking Bilhah, he is publicly declaring, "I am the alpha of this tribe now. The old man is finished."
That completely changes how you read the story. It is a terrifying power grab from within. And amidst all this internal chaos and betrayal, the text notes another major transition. Isaac, Jacob's aging father, finally passes away.
Yes.
And fascinatingly, both Jacob and his estranged brother Esau come together to bury him.
It is a brief but incredibly poignant moment of narrative symmetry. It directly mirrors the burial of Abraham, generations earlier, who was buried by his own warring sons, Isaac and Ishmael.
Oh, that's right.
These brothers, Jacob and Esau, find unity in the shadow of death, even though their actual lives and legacies will remain strictly divided.
Right after Isaac's death, Genesis chapter 36 just stops the narrative cold. We get this massive, dense genealogy of Esau's descendants who become the nation of Edom.
The Edomite sidetrack.
Yeah, like why on earth dedicate an entire lengthy chapter to the other who didn't even get the primary family blessing? Why does the reader need to know all these Edomite names?
Because the editors of this text had a very specific historical purpose. Modern scholars often look at this through a historical critical lens. They recognize that the text we read today is a woven tapestry.
It wasn't just written all at once.
Exactly. It wasn't just written down in one sitting by one person. It was stitched together over centuries.
Yeah.
From different ancient scribal traditions. You'll sometimes hear scholars refer to these as the J, E, or P sources.
Okay, right.
And by including this extensive genealogy, these ancient editors are legitimizing the neighboring nations. They are showing the ancient Israelite readers that God's blessings, wealth, massive families, established territory, extend far beyond just their own borders. Edom isn't erased from the story, it's acknowledged and structured.
And our source highlights a massive editorial clue hidden right in the middle of that genealogy that proves your point about it being a woven tapestry over time. There's a very specific phrase that says, "Kings reigned in Edom before any king reigned over Israel."
Exactly. Think about the mechanics of that phrasing.
It's a dead giveaway.
It really is. If this text was written entirely in real time by the patriarchs, or even by Moses in the wilderness, there were no kings in Israel yet. The concept didn't exist for them. So that phrase clearly shows that the text reflects much later political awareness.
Right.
It was finalized by an editor who lived during the time of the Israelite monarchy, hundreds of years later, looking back across the border at their neighbors in Edom and structuring their shared history.
It's amazing how many layers of history are hiding in plain sight in a simple genealogy. But as Jacob's generation fades and Esau's line is firmly established over in Edom, the spotlight fiercely shifts back to the main stage.
Back to the drama.
Oh, yeah. We move into Genesis 37, and the focus lands entirely on the next generation. And spoiler alert for anyone who hasn't been paying attention to how human nature works, blatant favoritism breeds catastrophic division.
It is the fatal flaw of this family. It is a generational curse repeating itself. Jacob's parents played favorites with him and Esau, and now Jacob is doing the exact same thing to his own children.
Jacob blatantly favors Joseph, the firstborn son of his deceased favorite wife, Rachel. He loves him more than the older sons, and he gives him this infamous coat of many colors, as the old translations call it. Now, I have to admit, I always pictured this as a flamboyant Technicolor dream coat.
Like a Broadway musical costume.
Exactly. A really flashy, obnoxious piece of clothing that just made his brothers jealous of his wardrobe.
We really need to shatter that myth, because looking at the historical mechanics of ancient garments, this was not a fashion statement. The Hebrew phrasing likely refers to an ornamented tunic with long sleeves extending to the wrists and ankles.
Okay, but why do long sleeves matter enough to start a family war?
Well, think about it. If you are wearing a long, elaborate tunic that reaches your wrists and ankles, what can you absolutely not do?
You cannot do hard manual labor in the field.
Precisely. By giving this specific garment to Joseph, who is the second youngest son, Jacob is visibly exempting him from the grueling work the older brothers are doing.
Wow, that is a statement.
It is. More importantly, it was a recognized symbol of patriarchal authority and status. Jacob is essentially bypassing the older brothers and signaling this kid is the future manager of this estate. It is a massive, visible, structural threat to their inheritance and their future survival.
So it's not just a nice shirt.
Not at all. Jacob isn't just giving his kid a nice gift. He's making a highly dangerous political declaration within his own camp.
Which brings us to the dreams. Here's where it gets really interesting. Joseph starts having these vivid dreams. First, he dreams that his brother's sheaves of wheat are bowing down to his sheaf.
Which is subtle.
Very subtle, right. And then he dreams that the sun, the moon, and 11 stars, representing his father, mother, and 11 brothers, are all bowing down to him. And then he just casually goes and tells his entire family all about it.
It's unbelievable.
I have to ask, what is going on in Joseph's head here? Is he just an incredibly naive teenager, or is he wildly arrogant and completely lacking in social awareness? It feels like a 22-year-old corporate intern walking into the boardroom, slapping his hands on the mahogany table, and happily announcing to the senior executives that he had a dream he'll be taking over the CEO job next week.
That analogy is absolutely spot on for the sheer audacity of the moment. And the answer is likely a toxic mixture of both. It's youthful, sheltered naivety combined with the unchecked arrogance of being the undisputed golden child.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But to fully grasp the danger of what he's doing, we have to understand the ancient Near Eastern mechanics of dreams.
Right, because they didn't just see dreams as, like, subconscious brain clutter from eating too much cheese before bed, right?
Not at all. Dreams were universally considered direct, divine communication. They were decrees from the gods regarding the future. So when Joseph gathers his brothers and tells them these dreams, he is not just saying, hey, I had a weird egotistical thought.
Right.
He is actively claiming, the divine realm has spoken, destiny is set, and every single one of you is beneath me.
That is pouring gasoline on a fire. But if it's considered a divine decree, why does Jacob, who already favors him, actually publicly rebuke him for the second dream?
Because sharing it disrupts the established social order so violently that Jacob has to maintain some semblance of patriarchal control. A son telling a father he will bow to him is unthinkable in an honor culture.
Yeah, you just don't do that.
But the text adds that brilliant, subtle psychological detail. Jacob rebukes him, but he keeps the matter in mind. He scolds the boy to keep the peace, but privately, he's terrified, wondering if it's actually a true prophecy.
But the brothers aren't wondering. They are past the point of annoyance. They are furious. And this toxic cocktail of inheritance anxiety, a father's blatant favoritism, and these divine delusions of grandeur finally boils over into actual violence.
It reaches a breaking point.
It does.
Yeah.
Joseph is sent out by Jacob to check on his brothers, who are tending the flocks far away from their father's protection.
And when they see him coming from a distance, likely spotting that obnoxious long-sleeved coat, they see their opportunity to eliminate the threat once and for all.
Now, it's really easy to just label these older brothers as the cartoon villains of the story. Purely evil guys twisting their mustaches who just irrationally hate their little brother. But the source material pushes back on that one-dimensional myth pretty hard.
Yes, it does.
If you look closely at the text, there's a lot of complex boardroom negotiation happening over Joseph's life.
Yes, the sociological lens is crucial here. The brothers' actions, horrific and inexcusable as they are, emerged from deep, simmering systemic tensions. They're living in an honor-shame culture where your status determines your survival.
It's literally life or death for them.
Exactly. They are dealing with desperate anxiety about their future inheritance, all exacerbated by a father who clearly values one son over the rest of them combined. They're acting out of a twisted sense of self-preservation. And, importantly, they aren't a monolith of evil. There's intense internal division among them.
Right. Reuben, the oldest brother, the exact same guy who made that awful power grab with Bilhah earlier, actually steps in and tries to save Joseph secretly. He convinces them to just throw Joseph in a pit, secretly planning to come back and rescue him later. Is he just trying to redeem himself and get back in his dad's good graces after the concubine incident?
That is a very strong psychological reading. Reuben desperately needs a win to secure his standing as the firstborn. But while Reuben is away from the group, Judah steps up.
And Judah takes a very different approach.
Very different. He sees a caravan of Ishmaelite merchants passing by and suggests, essentially, why kill him and get nothing when we can sell him, get rid of the problem, and turn a profit. It's cold, calculating pragmatism.
It is absolutely chilling. They pull their own flesh and blood out of a pit and sell him into slavery for 20 shekels of silver. And then comes the cover-up, which is arguably the most psychologically fascinating and devastating part of the entire chapter.
The bloody coat.
Yes. They take that special long-sleeved robe, the ultimate symbol of everything they hated and feared. They slaughter a goat, dip the robe in the goat's blood, and bring it back to Jacob. They don't even say Joseph is dead. They just hand him the bloody garment and let his own mind jump to the conclusion that a wild animal tore his favorite son to pieces.
It's a brutal psychological manipulation, and it completely breaks Jacob. He refuses to be comforted. He says he will go down to the grave mourning for his son. But if we connect this to the bigger picture, the literary genius of this specific moment is absolutely staggering. It is a profound, terrifying display of narrative karma.
Wait, how so? Break down the mechanics of that.
Think back decades earlier to Genesis 27. How did a young Jacob steal the family blessing from his own father Isaac? What were the mechanical tools of his deception?
Oh, wow. He used the meat of a slaughtered goat to fake the meal, and he put on his older brother Esau's clothes to deceive his blind father.
Exactly. Jacob deceived his father using clothing and a slaughtered goat. And now, decades later, Jacob is an old man, completely devastated, deceived by his own sons, using clothing and a slaughtered goat.
That is wild.
It is narrative karma operating flawlessly. There is no explicit divine intervention mentioned here. It doesn't say God punished Jacob. It is simply the psychological reality of unhealed generational trauma. The patterns of deception and favoritism that Jacob learned in his youth, he subconsciously rebuilt in his own family, and now they have come back to destroy him.
That is incredibly heavy. It really makes you rethink the whole idea of the perfect patriarch. Right. Reuben, the oldest brother, the exact same guy who made that awful power grab with Bilhah earlier, actually steps in and tries to save Joseph secretly. He convinces them to just throw Joseph in a pit, secretly planning to come back and rescue him later. Is he just trying to redeem himself and get back in his dad's good graces after the concubine incident?
That is a very strong psychological reading. Reuben desperately needs a win to secure his standing as the firstborn. But while Reuben is away from the group, Judah steps up.
And Judah takes a very different approach.
Very different. He sees a caravan of Ishmaelite merchants passing by and suggests, essentially, why kill him and get nothing when we can sell him, get rid of the problem, and turn a profit. It's cold, calculating pragmatism.
It is absolutely chilling. They pull their own flesh and blood out of a pit and sell him into slavery for 20 shekels of silver. And then comes the cover-up, which is arguably the most psychologically fascinating and devastating part of the entire chapter.
The bloody coat.
Yes. They take that special long-sleeved robe, the ultimate symbol of everything they hated and feared. They slaughter a goat, dip the robe in the goat's blood, and bring it back to Jacob. They don't even say Joseph is dead. They just hand him the bloody garment and let his own mind jump to the conclusion that a wild animal tore his favorite son to pieces.
It's a brutal psychological manipulation, and it completely breaks Jacob. He refuses to be comforted. He says he will go down to the grave mourning for his son. But if we connect this to the bigger picture, the literary genius of this specific moment is absolutely staggering. It is a profound, terrifying display of narrative karma.
Wait, how so? Break down the mechanics of that.
Think back decades earlier to Genesis 27. How did a young Jacob steal the family blessing from his own father Isaac? What were the mechanical tools of his deception?
Oh, wow. He used the meat of a slaughtered goat to fake the meal, and he put on his older brother Esau's clothes to deceive his blind father.
Exactly. Jacob deceived his father using clothing and a slaughtered goat. And now, decades later, Jacob is an old man, completely devastated, deceived by his own sons, using clothing and a slaughtered goat.
That is wild.
It is narrative karma operating flawlessly. There is no explicit divine intervention mentioned here. It doesn't say God punished Jacob. It is simply the psychological reality of unhealed generational trauma. The patterns of deception and favoritism that Jacob learned in his youth, he's subconsciously rebuilt in his own family, and now they have come back to destroy him.
That is incredibly heavy. It really makes you rethink the whole idea of the perfect patriarch. So, stepping back from the intense plot mechanics for a second, we have to ask the big question for you, the listener. So, what does this all mean? Our source document breaks down how modern scholars view this text through different analytical lenses, and when you weave them all together organically like we just did, it completely changes the reading.
It does. When you apply the literary lens, for instance, you see this story as a masterclass in the reversal narrative. The ultimate favored son, the untouchable golden child with the special robe, is stripped of his status in a matter of seconds and becomes the violently rejected outcast thrown into a dark pit.
And when you look at it sociologically, as we discussed, this isn't just a story about 10 angry brothers.
Right.
It reflects the very real historical tribal tensions that would plague the entire nation of Israel for centuries. The friction between the tribes of Judah, Reuben, and the descendants of Joseph, it all has its origin story right here in this petty, bitter sibling rivalry.
And psychologically, the characters function as profound archetypes. Joseph represents youthful, unchecked, arrogant idealism. The older brothers embody the terrifying, destructive power of collective resentment and mob mentality.
And Jacob.
Jacob is the tragic, passive figure. He's an aging man who is trapped repeating the very same traumatic patterns of favoritism and deception that shattered his own childhood.
Which brings it right down to you. If you are listening to this and wondering why on earth this ancient, deeply dysfunctional family drama matters to your life today, it's because it teaches a foundational lesson about how history actually works.
Yeah, the mechanics of history.
Exactly. Whether you view it through a theological lens of God's overarching plan or just a secular lens of human progress, the mechanism is exactly the same. Progress operates through deeply flawed people and fractured systems. It doesn't bypass them.
Right.
It doesn't wait for perfect, shiny individuals with flawless moral compasses. The great legacies, the ones that actually change the world, are almost always built by people who are entirely, frustratingly imperfect.
The dysfunction isn't an obstacle to the future. It is the very crucible in which the future is formed.
Exactly.